in my first 2 years as secretary, I got $2 billion in unbudgeted fuel price increases stuck into my budget. We had to make a decision to steam less, to train less, to fly less, to do less of the things that we needed to do to stay ready as a fighting force. 2009 and later 2009, I came out with various goals, energy goals for the Navy and Marine Corps. And the biggest one of which was that by no later than 2020, so last year, at least half of all naval energy afloat and ashore would come from non-fossil fuel sources, would come from renewables, would come from alternative fuels. And so how'd we do? Well, when I left, and it's still the case in terms of our bases, 2/3 of all energy on our naval bases, Marine Corps bases, comes from alternatives now. 1.2 gigawatts, enough to power a city the size of Orlando. And while the Navy and Marines are seagoing services, they also own 3.5 million acres of land and have 117,000 buildings. So this was not an insignificant thing. At sea, when I left, and in the air, 40% of our energy was coming from non-fossil fuel sources, 17% from nuclear, the rest from biofuels, and second, third generation biofuels. So not ethanol, but things that the requirements that we had was it could not take land out of food production. It had to be a drop-in fuel. We weren't going to change our engines or anything else. And it had to reduce the carbon footprint dramatically, and it had to be cost competitive with conventional fuel. So, as I said, 40% when I left, the Trump administration ended a lot of the biofuel things that we had set in motion. But what we did was use the Defense Production Act. We used it to establish it by presidential order. Barack Obama had told the Departments of Navy, Agriculture, and Energy to establish a nationwide biofuel sector. And we were able to do that. Using the Defense Production Act, we invested in 2 biofuel refineries, which are up and running today, and which are becoming much more cost competitive and much more successful. I did these energy goals as a warfighting measure because it gave us an edge. It helped us as a fighting force. And we not only changed the sources of energy, we also went to energy conservation. We started building hybrid ships with an electric motor for speeds under 12 knots and a normal marine diesel for speeds over 12 knots. Most warships don't travel that fast much of the time. Well, just changing the light bulbs on a destroyer, one of our smaller ships, saved that destroyer 20,000 gallons of fuel during the course of the year. And the light bulbs lasted for 7 years instead of 6 months. So you didn't have to change it. And the light was better. So we dramatically reduced energy consumption and particularly fossil fuel consumption. By the time I left, the Marines were using 63% less oil than was when I showed up. The Navy was using 16% less. And the Pentagon is the largest user of fossil fuels on Earth. They use 2% of all the fossil fuels being produced in the United States. And the Navy and Marine Corps are over a third of that. And so one of the things that happened was we were so big, we were using about 1% of the fossil fuels being produced in America. We were so big that when we changed our energy sources, we could bring a market. We could kickstart things like solar and wind and biofuels. And the ways that climate change have effect on national security are just myriad. The first and most obvious is on our bases. It's the Navy. Our bases are on the water for the most part. And as a good example, if we don't arrest sea level rise, the largest naval base in the world, Norfolk, Virginia, is going to go underwater. And it's going to go underwater relatively soon. It's already experiencing these king tides that keep sailors from getting to the base. Roads are flooding. And so if you had to get the fleet to sea, there's a pretty high likelihood that sailors couldn't get to their ships, that you literally couldn't get the fleet to sea today. And there has been, while the military looks at it and tries to plan for it, Congress has had absolutely no appetite to put any money behind it in terms of how do you protect that base. But it's not, and marine bases. Camp Lejeune in North Carolina was almost destroyed by a hurricane. It had $3 billion worth of damage. But it's not just the bases on the coast. Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska, in the middle of the country, flooded because of a nearby river that was overtaken by water. And it was out of commission for several weeks. So that's the most obvious thing. That's the thing that you see. But there are so many other climate change, national security items. The Navy and Marine Corps are not only America's first responders, showing up first at things like Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Sandy, but they're the world's first responders. While I was secretary, we got a request for disaster relief or humanitarian assistance, an average of once every 2 weeks for 8 years, and it's only gone up. When we are not addressing climate change in an adequate way, what we're doing is we're putting sailors and Marines and their lives at risk more and more. We don't have an infinite amount of time. The way sea level is rising, the way temperatures are rising, the way the ice is melting both in the Arctic and the Antarctic, the way that storms are increasing, it is something that we are going to have to deal with basically for the rest of our lives if we're going to pass along a planet to our children, to our grandchildren, that is livable.